Good afternoon, and welcome to our April 26, 2023 Community Readiness Podcast. Today with me is our co-responder clinician, Hillary Nusbaum. Hillary came to us back in September of 2021, I believe it is already.
Yep.
Seems like yesterday, as our co-responder for mental health runs. Since then, Hillary has become part of our police family and has just done tremendous things for our community. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about how this all became together.
Okay.
Our previous chiefs, Phil Langmeyer for obviously Bloomfield Township, Chief Gagnon from Auburn Hills, and Chief Clements, now retired out of Birmingham, came together and decided and put together a program that has now become a model.
Yep.
Throughout the state, we hope. It's really in Oakland County been taking off, but their goal was to assist the officers responding to the mental health calls or behavioral crisis calls that we respond to with professional help, with resources that officers typically just aren't comfortable with or don't have the knowledge of.
Yep.
And so that brought upon your job.
Yes.
So let's talk about what it is. Our co-responder program is what we call the CORE program. It's a partnership between us and Oakland County,
Oakland Community Health Network.
Oakland Community Health Network, who you're actually employed through, but paid for by all our police departments. So it's a great partnership. And it took us, a good 9 months or so to build the program before we even implemented it.
Yes.
We recognized through the police departments that the officers our calls for service, whether it was a family trouble, whether it was a drug overdose, were increasing, especially during the pandemic.
Yep.
But there was a real need for the officers to have another resource, which I don't want to just refer to you as a resource, but the
That's true,
resources in that you can provide our officers in the training has been, I don't know if we can measure it accurately, especially internally. So we are so happy to have you there. Give us a little insight from your perspective, coming from, you were in the public schools before, jumping into being probably one of the first co-responders, at least in our area. We know Battle Creek, we know Lansing had some type of programs, but from an outsider coming in, what's it been like for you?
This has been by far a career highlight for me as a social worker, and coming into it, I think all of us kind of felt like we were building a plane in the air, not really knowing exactly what was going to unfold. But over the last couple of years, I think we've built a really solid program, and it's really exciting to see other organizations join in, like Troy Police Department, Oakland County Sheriff's Department is joining in now, and now the program seems to be building. So it is exciting to be on the ground floor of that. Coming in as a social worker, I didn't know how the relationships would go, developing relationships with police as an outsider, and it's gone above and beyond what I could have expected.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I mean, there was apprehension, especially after the 2020 George Floyd was where the real big call came for social workers in our field, and there was from a law enforcement perspective, there was a little bit of fear, like, oh, people are going to come in and take over our jobs, which is totally not what the outcome has been. The partnership has been amazing, and the best part is the training and the things we realized we needed once we got this program up and running.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about is CIT. Give us a little bit of an explanation of what CIT is from your perspective as a co-responder, but also for the officers' perspective a little bit, and why it's so much advantageous for us.
Yeah. So CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team, and it's a 40-hour training that we put on for law enforcement. And by we, I mean Oakland Community Health Network puts it on, but partners with law enforcement. So there's law enforcement partners who are facilitators, and there's OCHN people that are facilitators, and we kind of come together and teach this training. So it's very, very basic skills that we can use, or law enforcement can use out on calls to sort of help de-escalate a situation and obviously keep us away from use of force as much as possible and get people to the right resources in that moment. So we bring law enforcement in, we kind of train them, for that week, and we've had a lot of really good, experiences and a lot of good feedback from law enforcement. It's been a really amazing program to be a part of, and to see how each organization and some of our law enforcement officers are actually using those skills out on scenes. So yeah, it's a great partnership, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, as one of the first co-responders,
Yes.
the first co-responder in Oakland County. Obviously, working road patrol, we recognize the difference as an administration from the officers, and we get emails already from our residents talking about the difference some of the officers have when we are dealing with someone in their family who is suffering a behavioral crisis.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems we run into in law enforcement overall, is that we're asked and we've been tasked with so many other duties other than just enforcing criminal laws.
Right.
We are called upon for, you name it, to help with parenting at times, disorderly people, intoxicated people, drug overdoses. But one of the big ones that we always got stuck on is mental health. Mm-hmm. Somebody that's in a behavioral crisis that some of us can't relate to necessarily because we haven't experienced it personally or in our families.
Right.
So we do our best, but we didn't know the resources or what resources were out there. And in just the short, it's been almost a year and a half, we'll say, that the program's been there, the amount of people we have trained in CIT and in the crisis intervention training, peer support, has increased a lot. I've talked about past Sergeant April Satala and Officer Jen Lauer at our department who have really spearheaded our mental health programs and didn't just stop them at the core program, right? We continue to push forward, which is really filtered because of our program into other areas such as Royal Oak and Ferndale and Southfield and White Lake. And we can keep going on because we have such great relationships with those departments as well.
Yeah.
But these don't happen overnight. And I think it's important for the community to know, and people, we meet monthly, correct? Yeah. And we're always we're evaluating the program to date, and trying to figure out how we go better. And the number of, I think we started with maybe 15, 20 people and now we're probably up to 30, 40
I was just thinking the same thing, yeah. It's growing exponentially. Every meeting we have more and more people there. Yeah,
and Auburn Hills is a great host for it. We do it once a month, and if needed, but then there's also subcommittees on policies, on training, on where can we go. And luckily it's caught some of the attention of some of our county commissioners, our state reps, that we're now funded through this year at least on a grant,
right?
The SAMHSA grant, and which really helped us because now we're able to expand the program. We added this year the city of Rochester, and hired a second clinician, which took a while. But let's talk about that a little bit because there was such a call for this, the partnership between social work and law enforcement, and the apprehension. But it just took us about 6 months at least to find one candidate who wanted to do what you do.
Yeah, I think finding the right social workers, the right people to fit this position is really important. You want to hire someone who wants to form the relationships with law enforcement, and be able to work together. Because if you don't have that partnership, it just doesn't work. And a big part, going back to CIT too, a big part of CIT is helping officers know what resources are available in Oakland County. So when I'm on scene and there are some options available, if I have that relationship built with that officer, I can say, hey, have we thought about Common Ground as a resource? Have we thought about Sober Support Unit? Those are different, opportunities that I can present to officers, but it helps to have those relationships built. So finding the right candidate, the right people to really fit this position, it's tough. It's hard work. So
it is hard work, and it's that unknown. You are responding in real time to law enforcement related matters. Obviously, we've built in safety protocols. One, you wear a ballistic vest just as an officer, but it's differentiated from us. It says social worker everywhere. It's gray, not blue. Or when the county goes to their black uniforms, and we're trying to keep that consistent now as departments build this out so that it becomes a norm. But the number of people who even trust law enforcement a little more coming into those situations, who think they may think they're going to jail or going to a hospital, we're able to maybe doing a little bit of an assessment on scene and realize they're not an immediate threat to themselves or anybody else, and they can stay home, and we can follow up the next day to make sure they're getting the resources, or they contacted their clinicians, whoever they're using. So coming from the outside, though, Do you see the need? Do you feel the officers felt this was a need, but not maybe didn't recognize it at the time when it was coming together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I came in, first of all, nobody ever said, like that they didn't want me there, right? But as the program developed and as I started showing up on scenes, more and more officers started saying things to me like, wow, like the need was there. I just didn't know exactly what you would do or what kind of resources you would provide. So then, some officers kind of started coming out of the woodwork and saying like, I used to be a naysayer, right? I wouldn't have said it, but now I totally, we need to have you just for our department, you know? So.
And that's one thing we've realized, is while you share the workload right now with 4 agencies until our other clinicians onboarded here, hopefully very soon, this didn't happen overnight, you rode with each agency for months before we actually took, or for weeks at least, before you started actually taking or co-responding with us to build that relationship, to get the understanding. We needed to understand the social work aspect of it, and you needed to kind of understand the law enforcement aspect and how we did it. And what you did, which really helped the officers, is what the questions you asked. What are you apprehensive about? Where can we bridge this gap? And it's really been, in my opinion, seamless from an administrative point of view. We talk about co-responding. You get a car, you get a vest, you get a police radio. If most people didn't know, they would think you are a police officer because of the gear that you get, that you're not armed. But you respond to runs with us. So this year to date, what do you think? How many calls have you co-responded where you've actually been dispatched with an officer to the residence?
Right. So year to date, I've gone on 30 different calls. I've been on scene with officers for 30 different calls just for Bloomfield Township. And that's not including I was gone for a whole month. So that's really looking at just 3 months. And those calls continue to increase. Over the last 3 days, I think I've been on 9 different calls. So the calls keep coming in, it's job security for me for sure, but it's ever growing. There's always a need. Mental health is huge. I think the statistic was 10% of police calls end up being mental health calls. Just from my perspective and my opinion, I think it's much higher.
I would agree with that. Yeah, that's crazy to me to think that's it, because when we developed the program, we realized there was a mental health component or behavioral or substance abuse component to a lot of what we do. For us, we overloaded jails or we overloaded hospitals because before we knew the resources, we were kind of stuck. Now we're able to go directly to Common Ground, or we have that, the connections with Common Ground or Havenwick, where we can take people to get them the immediate help, because we don't need to fill up emergency rooms with people who need psychiatric care, immediate psychiatric care, which the hospitals are overloaded, especially during a pandemic, right? So we did talk a little bit about that. When we built the program, we were really thinking about the number of mental health calls. We didn't really factor in how many family troubles may the underlying cause be. We also do some proactive things, which we started kind of doing after some critical incidents here in Bloomfield Township and in other jurisdictions. As if we have a fatal car accident, I know I personally have asked you, hey, these people witnessed some really, disturbing things. Would you mind just reaching out and telling them who you are and why you would, do it? And I think that really helps bridge this gap, even with our community and you. I mean, we have people ask about our co-responder program now because of things like that. So I have stats here too, which, again, our stats, we can look at them many different ways. If a dispatcher takes a call for service, they may put it in as a mental health run or a family trouble. But after the officers get there, we may determine that it is somebody in a mental health crisis or behavioral crisis. And so that call may be logged into our computer system as a family trouble, but in our report writing system, it's a little bit, it could be a little more of a mental health call. But just this first quarter alone, our system shows that we've put in 66, so this is just from January 1st till now, 66 crisis outreach referrals. Now, I know not every one of them requires follow-up from you because some of them are already getting services. But we at least let you know about them, or we code them that way So we know when there's the repeat runs. Our goal, one of the goals, is to stop the repeat runs to residents. But you're probably seeing now. You know some of our residents.
I do. Yep.
You know that we're seeing. But I pulled numbers from 2018 to 2022, and we only ran. I don't want to say only because it's still significant. And again, this is only calls that were labeled mental health.
Okay.
We went on 58 then, and we're up to 85 this year.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, in 2022, we're already at almost 50 for this year, where it's just that, again, that doesn't include substance abuse calls, that doesn't include family troubles or domestic violence cases or any other type of case that may involve a behavioral issue. These are just the ones we knew going into them.
Yeah.
That were mental health runs. It is really its own epidemic or pandemic in itself.
It is. Yeah, mental health is a problem right now. You know, we see that, we know that it's real. And for the amount of referrals that I've gotten just from Bloomfield Township on top of those 66, so I have a total of 95 referrals from officers that have come in beyond those crisis outreach calls, right? So like you said, domestic violence, family troubles, welfare checks, whatever that may be, I'm getting those referrals and having to follow up. So there's definitely an increase in mental health concerns. And I think some of that is COVID related. I think when COVID happened, the anxiety has gone on a spike. We see it in teens, we see it in school, and we definitely see it in adults too.
Let's talk about, you said teens real quick. And the other day I was showing a video. I think it was made by Dove, and it's literally a video. It's about 3 minutes long. Yeah. And it's about teens, social media, and mental health, and the damage that this social media is doing to our teens' mental health. It's actually scary. The instant gratification that we need now, you know, we can order from Amazon right now, and by the time we get home tonight, we might have the product at our door. And we're running into the problems with teens, especially adult, or, you know, preteen or early teens, of the need for that acceptance.
Yep.
And we're seeing, or especially you coming from a school district before here, there's a danger there, and we really need to get the word out to parents to monitor social media. Yes. It is causing depression. It is causing social, anxiety and panic attacks, because we need that immediate acceptance. And it's kind of alarming. It is alarming. And cyberbullying is at an all-time high right now, and that's kind of what you're talking about, right? That social media. There are apps that we're discovering every day that we didn't know about, where, you know, teens or kids have the opportunity to talk back and forth. Gaming, right? They're talking to each other back and forth on gaming, and it's really hard to censor exactly what's being said back and forth or who they're talking to. So it's a really tough thing to monitor when it comes to social media, and you're talking about, you know, kids whose brains are still being developed and who are really easily influenced, and now running into these like bullying issues from online, and it is creating a problem. It's scary. Yeah. Last year alone, we went on 27 suicidal people. That was the actual call that came in. Yeah. That's not including ones that we went to a problem with a teen or something that may have just called you for advice because the officers are saying, hey, we have a social worker that works with us. You can give her a call to find out how you might handle this situation when your child's saying something that you just don't know how to handle, or you're paranoid because they said something, you know, whether they were mad or not, and we're running into that. So again, I can't stress how important this program has been to our agency, and again, that partnership with, you know, we've really created the partnership with Auburn Hills and Birmingham. Let's talk a little bit about how your day looks then. So your work week divided amongst 4 agencies, right? One person, 4 agencies. Yep. So how does that work for you? Yeah, it's really hard to nail down a weekly schedule just because I am kind of everywhere. But so typically I try and do 4 10-hour days. And when this program started, you guys had done a really great job of tracking data on when the high volume of calls comes in, or mental health calls come in. So I'm trying to work on those days where that high volume of calls come in. I have my own vehicle, and so I keep, like you said, the police radio on, and I'm tracking all 4 departments. So I'm just listening for those keywords: welfare checks, domestic violence, family trouble. When those calls come out, I really try to pay attention to what's going on.
and then, I'll call in to dispatch and let them know that I'm going to that call, or dispatch will call me and send me to that call. So that's part of my day, is the actual co-response piece, where I'm out in my car, kind of bouncing around from city to city. The other part is follow-up, which is another crucial, I think, part of what I do, which is I'm sitting at a desk calling back individuals who police have had run-ins with, and maybe I couldn't have been there, but now they want me to follow up because maybe it is their son is suicidal and they need me to follow up with them. And that call happened at 2 a.m. and I'm not there. Or they might need some resources like therapy resources. That's where it's really great, where we have that partnership with OCHN, because they have a lot of those resources, and I kind of have them in my toolbox where I can offer those resources to people. So I do a lot of follow-up phone calls to families, to individuals, those kinds of things, to see what kind of resources they need. So that's kind of the other part of my job. On a day-to-day basis, that could take a couple hours, or it could be less, just depends. So that's kind of what I'm doing. The other kind of fun part of my job is, detectives will pull me in on cases or ask me to help out with different things. So every day looks a little bit different, and it's really exciting. That's what I like about my job, is I never know what the day's going to bring.
Right. So. Internally, we've talked. I've hosted other podcasts, and we talked about peer support teams, and obviously, immediately you were thrust into some even internal agency things that came about unexpectedly, with tragedies either internally for our agency, or within Bloomfield Township, I should say, involving our officers, or people have just come to you, afterwards, or being on a scene, and we have an outlet because you have built that trust.
Right.
And that is something. When people, I know officers have said to you in the past, man, we could just hire you for our own place, and it's because we're recognizing the need, and that's where I give Sergeant Swatala and Officer Lauer a lot of credit, is that we recognize the need. We're trying to create the avenues and the comfort level for officers to feel that it's okay to come talk to somebody.
Right.
But we don't just want to go talk to anybody.
Right.
We're going to talk to people that we trust, and I think that's something big that you've brought to that. With that, though, is debriefs, critical incident debriefs, which... we put officers in patrol cars and we tell them to go from one scene to another scene to another scene. And sometimes it could be days in between, a major incident, or it could be, back-to-back calls,
right.
Whether it's an injured child and then a fatal car accident. You've been proactive with our people and seeking them out when that happens. But it's also, I know there was a tragedy in Birmingham where we were able to assist, our agency was able to go down, our crisis intervention, our peer support team, and to do a debrief with all the officers.
Right.
That's been pretty, and some of them we didn't think would talk, but we're actually pretty open.
I've been really impressed and surprised myself to see how it's called critical incident stress management. Those debriefs have gone so incredibly well. Officers are trained to just go to, like you said, go to these calls, go to back-to-back, calls that could be potentially traumatic, and they just learn to just go with it and don't realize how it's affecting them mentally. So when they have the chance, to stop and really kind of talk about that, and they're given that permission, it is really good to see some of that kind of unfold. And we've seen internally, like you said, some of our officers who've really been to some horrific scenes, and now we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of that and have made incredible progress. But it is something we always have to pay attention to, as officer wellness. That is hugely important. And
you started just prior to Oxford, and we were able to loan your services. Obviously, you have a prior school background with students, but we were able to allow you and your team and some of the other co-responders who were onboarding at the time that ability to go help out on situations such as that, which you look at MSU. That affects our entire community. We have parents, we have residents who go to MSU that could have been affected by it, and we know we had some cases where we did respond on some things related to it. So I just, again, that value, and I know we're talking to the community about it, but I think it's so important for everyone to understand the value behind it. And I as an administrator of a police department, really respect how the other chiefs of police and community leaders have opened the door to this idea, recognizing that there is a partnership to be had here. And the things that we can hopefully provide for our officers, because again, I don't go on calls every day anymore, but I'm sure have to provide the resources for our officers to make sure that we have a successful ending, and to do everything we can to try to reduce the use of force on cases. And luckily here we don't have a high amount of use of force, but the ones that we do typically involve some type of behavioral crisis or substance abuse.
One of the parts of my job that I haven't mentioned, but is one of my favorite parts of my job, is jumping into the car with one of our officers and just riding with them for a few hours. And part of that is, any kind of call could pop off and I happen to be in the car with them, and it might not be something I would normally go to, but it ends up being a mental health call or has mental health elements, within it. The other part is I continue to work on that relationship and I hear what's going on with that officer. And that's what I really like, is kind of knowing how that officer's doing, kind of, hearing from them. And it's that relationship building, but it also helps me kind of know what's going on.
And before we end it today, I think there's just a way when we talk about the proactivity or a success story, as I know back, it's probably 2 or 3 months ago now, maybe a little longer, in the fall, maybe last year, when we did have a tragedy of a construction worker who was tragically killed on a scene. And you were training, if I remember correctly, you were training Ken from Troy, and you were able to respond to that scene because it was witnessed, and you guys were able to debrief or at least have conversations with the other coworkers who were on scene there. And that's something we as a law enforcement agency would not have been able to provide. You guys came to the scene while the officers are investigating what happened. You guys were able to pull aside the coworkers and actually kind of debrief.
I mean, that was kind of our whole goal, was to triage, those coworkers and make sure that we're working with those who are more highly impacted, and dealing with, whatever crisis they're dealing with right in that moment. And then the great part of that too was being able to relate some information that needed to go back to law enforcement on the scene. So working with the sergeant who was on the scene and being able to relay some information like, hey, you might need to go and talk to so-and-so about this because here's a concern or worry that they have, and kind of, again, bridging that gap. But yeah, that was absolutely an honor to be on and be a part of.
And unfortunately, a lot of the ones that were going on where you are needed end in tragedy or because of a tragedy, but it's that proactiveness that we talk about. And I think of another one that we had was a death scene that I remember being there, and you came down to the scene, and the family we were on scene talking with the family, and they were yelling for you to come over so they could actually talk to you. Because you built that trust right away. They recognized the reason you were there. And I know it just makes our job so much more efficient, and the residents a lot, it's a service to the residents that they deserve. And that's what we do. So I think we're going to wrap it up for today. There's so much more. We could go on for days on this topic because it's so important. But I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
All right.
Appreciate it.
We'll take a break. We'll be back shortly.
Well, I'm still soaked and muddy, but we had an altercation between roommates. One roommate got upset, hit the other roommate, and then pepper sprayed him and took off on foot. So we knew that he didn't have a car. We were able to determine that the other roommates had keys to the car. So my job, which I was actually on my way into work, so they called me on the radio and said, hey, we need you over here. I said, okay, no problem. That's where I'm heading. So once I got there, I took an officer, and it's like, okay, let's find out where this guy went. And darn if he didn't immediately go down to a ravine toward the Rouge River. And so we had to go down this, it's extremely steep ravine. You could actually see where he had lost his footing and his butt or something hit the ground, and he just slid the entire way down. And plots. He went down here. Oh, no, here. Vince was on him, and there was anything I could to hold that poor dog back. You see it? His footprint's right there. Here! Easy. So what did I do? Hit my butt on the ground. All right, let's go, and just slid my way down the ravine. I'm a little wet still. And then we had to find our way across the river because we could see where the suspect had crossed the river. Unfortunately, it was pretty deep, so we actually found a tree that had fallen across, so we were able to get Vince across on that and then get ourselves across. So we tracked a little bit over 1.5 miles, but we just couldn't. We just couldn't get him. Unfortunately, the guy had about an 1.5 hour head start, so we were really behind him on that at that point. So we did our best. Come on, stick it up. It's like, what the hell, Mom? You just made me cross a log. We'll do another track later, a practice track, so he can end successfully and get to play.
Welcome back to our Community Readiness Podcast. I just want to take a minute to update the community on some of the activities that are occurring in Bloomfield Township and around our local jurisdictions. We have still seen an increase or continued increase in auto thefts. We still cannot stress enough to remove your key fobs from your vehicles. The majority of the cars that have been stolen over the last couple of weeks have all had the key fobs left in the vehicles. We also did last Wednesday, April 19th, myself, our Oakland County Commissioners from Bloomfield Township and Pontiac, along with Michigan State Police, Oakland County Sheriff's Department, and many of the agencies that border Woodward Avenue, met in relation to the drag racing and to the noise on Woodward. We continue to combat this problem. We are working with our lawmakers. We're working with our county commissioners and state legislators to work on a solution to these problems. We are well aware of them. Unfortunately, right now, there's very limited state laws that we can write and enforce, reference these matters, but we are out there enforcing what we can, and we also have overtime detail cars strictly assigned to the Woodward Avenue corridor on the weekends to hopefully curb some of the unsafe driving behaviors that we're seeing. Also last week, on April 17th, our officers responded to the Bed Bath & Beyond here in Bloomfield Township in reference to a retail fraud. They were able to catch up to the suspects in a vehicle and make an arrest on these two individuals from Ohio who had been here stealing, as they quoted in the news articles, a plethora of candles from Bed Bath & Beyond. Our officers recovered over $1,600 worth of candles. These two individuals who were arrested, again, were from Ohio. They have a long history for organized retail fraud. They were both arrested, charged with retail fraud in the first degree, one of them in a third degree for another. The bonds they were able to post the bonds and they're back out, so hopefully they've learned their lesson, but they're awaiting their next court date. We also were involved on Telegraph last week of another retail fraud that involved a foot pursuit with our officers across Telegraph Road. Individuals were at Costco stealing items. They were observed by the loss prevention, and upon arrival of the officers, they fled on foot. Our officers engaged in a foot pursuit with them and were able to take one subject into custody, and I believe we identified the other. So we continue to be proactive. We're still responding to several crimes in our area. The majority of them are still property crimes. We're asking our residents, we need your assistance. We can't be everywhere. We consider our residents our force multiplier. Your cameras, your phones, and your cooperation with us really help us out. If you need anything from the Bloomfield Township Police Department, please do not hesitate to call our agency. The phone number, again, the non-emergency line is 248-433-7755. That's 248-433-7755. And if you're in an emergency, do not hesitate to call 911. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.